Where do we want to arrive with the path of knowing oneself? There is a limitation to what we can conceive with our minds, okay? So even though we think that our imagination is boundless, let me plant this little doubt in your mind, if I may. There are things we cannot conceive. And one of that is exactly what we may achieve as human beings if we develop our full potential. So I can give you some hints, some pointers, but it's difficult for me to say, and it's difficult for you to take in a concept which is really beyond human. Having said that, let's try, okay? There are different classes of substances around us, and there are different ways to categorize them. And each of them has a different degree of density and of speed, vibration, if you let me use this term. And moving forward in our path of self-realization means we are going toward a finer state. That means we are less close to matter and more close to air or more close to light. What is the main difference between a brick and the air we breathe? Well, the ability of the air to penetrate and infuse other objects which are more dense, the ability to take any shape and to propagate very quickly. So if you open a can of air in a place where there is no air, very soon that will fill the area. What is the property of light? Well, light travels at an incredible speed, and whatever it touches becomes visible. So this by itself should suggest that light is a very special thing. In fact, it's very appropriate to compare light to consciousness. And we will go over this analogy often because I think it's a wonderful one. So what I was going to say is, as we move up in our level of consciousness, we are closer and closer to different states of being whose difference to physicality is similar to the difference between light, air, and a brick. Okay, so allow me to say that in the ordinary state of consciousness, we are much closer to a brick. And we want to move towards something which is free to move, free to expand, has practically no boundaries, and can travel in something as large as the solar system in a matter of minutes, as light does. So this is just an analogy to say that I could talk about angels and archangels and things like that, but these names evoke in your minds most probably some iconic images and some memories of a mass in a Christian church, which is not what I would like to elicit at this time. I'd rather you consider the freedom and the beauty of being like a beam of light that moves in space, rather than thinking of an image that belongs to your memories of the childhood. Yet the concept is not wrong. But sometimes I will deliberately avoid to use certain terms which I consider very likely to evoke in your mind the wrong association. So it is by intention that I refrain from mentioning often the sacred scriptures or saints or the names of very, very high characters that could easily fit into this conversation. At times I will do, but I'm refraining from doing so as much as I can, because they are connected to certain things in your minds, which I prefer to leave by the side. So this is one of the reasons why this lecture cannot be too popular, because I'm not using the usual icons. Forgive me for that, you will gradually see why this may be useful. Good. So let's now go to the core topic. The sleep of consciousness. The most frequent invitation in the Gospels is for us to watch and pray. Now, watch is not to be understood in the term of you can't go to bed because you must not sleep forever. Watch is something we can better understand if we know what is a state of presence, where we are in control of our thoughts and feelings and body postures. This is the fourth way, don't forget. So when we hear an invitation to be watchful in an esoteric context, we should see it from the point of view of being aware of ourselves. Since I mentioned that, what is pray about? The best explanation I've found so far is something I've heard from an American researcher, Greg Braden, about the ancient lost method of prayer used in Eastern monasteries. That reminds us that when you have a feeling, and I point at the center of our chest when I say feeling, because that's where you can normally feel them. The feelings are like a radio station broadcasting to the universe. And based on what you broadcast, the cosmos or the source or God, however you want to call it, tends to listen and fulfill our request. Now, if this request is unconscious, that is, we are not in control of our feelings and thoughts, then of course our request may be pretty dangerous. So suppose we are always complaining about people treating us badly, that we don't deserve what's happening, and the world is very sad, and these things. So if we radiate this 24 hours a day, then something higher up listens and says, oh, he wants more of that. Okay, let him have it. On the other hand, if you become more, let's say, positive and constructive in your thoughts and feelings, then things start to shift. So when we say pray, we may mean our more or less conscious request towards the higher cosmos to have something enter our reality. I say our reality because it's useful to keep in mind that we may perceive things very differently from our neighbor. It is not obvious at all that we see the same world that everybody else sees. In fact, what I call green or beautiful might be totally different from what some of you call green or beautiful. And if you think about that, it's difficult to find a way to exactly agree on that. Nevertheless, when you study things like the law of attraction, you're told, oh, if you think positive, then whatever you conceive will materialize in your life. Or if you think of healing and recovering from your illness, you will get that. I may agree about that, but I'd like to add a little detail. That is, if reality, the cosmos, is listening to you, it's listening to you 24/7. Now, if you are positive for 5 minutes, and then you start falling back to a lower level of consciousness and negativity for 23 hours and 55 minutes, then what's the average of your request to the cosmos? You do the sum, you do the math, so that's what you get. So why can't we just decide that, for example, I shall be positive and constructive all day? It seems easy. I say that and I'll do it. The fact is, after 5 minutes, I could suddenly realize that I have forgot and I'm thinking of something totally different. So this is what I mean when I say the sleep of consciousness, that our thoughts, our feelings come without our consent or intention most of the time. And to realize that, it takes an effort. Normally, we just suffer this condition and we don't even realize it. Then somebody points this out and says, did you notice that? And we have a glimpse of that. Then we forget again, and the eyes of our consciousness shut. And again, we may spend hours or days in this sort of daydream, which is our ordinary state. And then again, something happens. I wake up again and say, oh, I'm here. What happened of my resolve to do that? I forgot. How could that happen? Well, do not judge yourselves too harshly if you have forgot, because that is the ordinary state of the human being on earth currently. In fact, if I start criticizing myself because I have forgot, that's just one more thought that comes uninvited. So I may easily fall in the trap of being sucked in by that thought and spending a few minutes or seconds criticizing myself because, oh, I forgot, I'm so bad. That is one of the several traps of your ego, of our ego. So we are here to learn about these traps, to learn to identify what is real within ourselves and what is just an aggregate, something that has clinged to ourselves like a big black backpack, which is always holding on to us, connected to our mind, feelings, and body, and lives off our energies. If this is a bit scary, let's say that probably is less so than the image you got in the Matrix movie when Neo realizes that he was in a pod and he was being harvested. Let's say that many of us may have had an intuition or a glimpse or a dream where we saw ourselves being under the control of something else. That may be a call from your consciousness that points in this direction of going towards your freedom. Nobody will look for freedom unless they first realize they are in a prison. And if this prison has invisible bars, and if you are told lies that it's all your fault if you can't do this and that, then how will you ever conceive the idea of a breakout, of escaping from your prison? That's very hard. So the main reason why I'm here today is to help you cast your look inside and decide for yourself if you are free or if you are in a prison. Once you see that, you may decide that you want to break out. And breaking out of that particular prison requires effort and may be greatly helped by a group work. So friends who have the same purpose. Whether the group may be this one or another one, that's irrelevant as long as the purpose is common. So if you want to go in the same direction, then there is a higher amount of strength. There is a big amount of deception goes on nowadays in our minds and around us. That is the subject of a further lecture in a couple of weeks, but the effect is similar to our self-deception. So in the end, once we have trained our consciousness to be present and to be mindful of what happens inside, the source of our parasite thoughts is less important than our ability to detach ourselves from them and reclaim our freedom in that instant, which basically is your little step towards that longer way of freedom. Each of these steps is absolutely important. Each time you wake up during your day and observe a thought or a feeling, you're doing something that will never be undone. So do not underestimate this. I'd like to show you an image. Let's see. This is here. So let me open this. Okay. Can you see the image now?
Yes.
Okay, good. What I've shown here, I would ask you to first look at the central bit, the four-tiered structure. These are possible states of consciousness in which each of us can be at any given time. So at any moment, we are in one of these states of consciousness. Starting from the lowest level, something I've labeled horizontal sleep. That's easy to describe. That's when you are in bed and you may be snoring or not, but let's say that you're sleeping. That's a classical sleep. Then comes the most dangerous and least known one, which I've dubbed vertical sleep or waking dream. That is called in various ways, like a state of identification with the reality around ourselves, or just as importantly, identification with some thought or feeling that we have inside. That means when we are not feeling our presence, but we are somehow lost in something we are thinking or we are feeling, or something that is part of our body condition. This is the state where most of our day is normally spent. And we are here to try and take one step up towards the third state, which will be best described next week, but is important to mention at this point. This is called self-remembering, or the feeling of oneself, or the presence of oneself. And that means that while I am, for example, talking to you, I am also feeling that I'm doing the talk. So I have an attention which goes in two directions at once. And that doesn't remove any of the attention I can give to what I'm seeing or talking or saying, but allows me to not lose the feeling of presence which will go with it. So I feel in the here and now, so to speak. And this is the state where we become not only more conscious, but more responsible. We start having the opportunity to consider our thoughts and feelings before they express themselves through us. There are a lot of differences in our life when we make this transition from vertical sleep into a moment of presence, of self-remembering. May I ask you to please mute your microphone when you're not talking, so there will be less noise going around. Thank you. There is yet one state which is higher than that, objective consciousness, that is more of a divine condition than a human one. I mentioned that for completeness, but if we were able to just transition from vertical sleep into self-remembering, that would be already quite a great result for ourselves. I've caught a glimpse of that state, and hopefully everybody has or will have the opportunity. And I suppose that is somehow higher than what is normal for a human being. Anyway, that is not our greatest concern now. There are countless examples of what happens in vertical sleep as opposed to what happens in self-remembering. We will go through that now, but before moving on, I would like to just go over the side part of the image. Maybe I should do this, because in fact for you it will be on that side. Anyway, these are the various beings who will normally spend most of their lives in a certain state of consciousness. A forward to this, the idea in the fourth way teachings, and I'm personally inclined to agree with that, is that there is life and there is some level of consciousness in everything. So with this in mind, the lowest level of consciousness and the slowest vibration, if you let me use this term, is in the mineral world, the underground. The next realm in terms of consciousness and ability to, let's say, express it would be the plants world. Plants are definitely alive. I think there's no way to deny that. And yet they are not just like us or like animals. They are said to live in a sort of a state of sleep. A little higher than that, we see animals which live in a very mechanical way. They follow their instincts. They don't question them. They are not able to evolve into a higher being. Not during a single lifetime. So there may be a way to see that across different lives, but I'm talking about a single life. In the same area of vertical sleep, you will find a mechanical human, which is not coincidence, is pretty close to animals. So you can see examples of that when somebody is completely absorbed by chanting in a stadium, something offensive, or part of a crowd that wants to lynch somebody. But there are a lot of ways to be sleeping, although our eyes are open. When a human starts to awaken, then we move into self-remembering and normally oscillate between that and vertical sleep while we are in the process of awakening. So we spend longer and longer portions of our day in a higher state, then we fall back. And as we produce more fuel for being awake, that will be a different conversation, we can spend more time in a higher vibration or higher state of consciousness. And on we go towards a fully awake human and towards something which is beyond the human realm, which I've briefly mentioned earlier. So let me just stop the screen sharing. You're welcome to have that image if you would like. Just let me know, or I may send that directly to each of you so you can have it and use it if you would like as a reminder. So what is the way we feel when we are in a state of sleep, of consciousness? Well, everything happens to us. There is no real choice. And what I mean is we always do whatever is somehow programmed inside us. We are mechanical. This is why, by the way, sometimes our friends know exactly what we are going to say or how we are going to react. And this is the way we are known to the others. They know some traits of our personality which somehow represent our ego or personality. And people know that. Sometimes we deny that because it's difficult for us to see it. But while others can see that, we can also start to see that if we cast our look inwards. Normally, when we are in the state of sleep of our consciousness, we are also possessed by two very powerful creatures, let's say our biggest egos, so to speak, called vanity and pride. We have several possibilities of behaving in a strange or bad way, but vanity and pride somehow take the lead, because once we have a totally artificial and mechanical personality, as we normally do, that's our starting point, we have to somehow defend our sanity, and we cannot admit that we are mechanical. So the biggest defenders of this artificial situation are our vanity and pride, for which whatever we do or say which is off somehow, or is unjustifiable, or is just plain mean, we tend to justify. So when somebody says, "Hey, Alberto, what you said was not right," the tendency from my ego is to come and react with a sort of justification and say, no, but it's his fault, or because there's this reason or there's that reason. It's very hard to just keep silent and look inside and maybe admit that perhaps we are not so perfect. Maybe sometimes we do something wrong. It's very difficult because we are also taught that if we admit our weakness, others may attack us and make fun of us and consider themselves superior and make us feel even worse. So an environment where we are free to say, oh, well, that's a defect of mine, thank you for telling me. An environment like that is a precious oasis where one can actually freely explore his interior realm. So that's one of the reasons why sometimes a group of committed friends can be a great environment to nurture your growth. Because if I go and admit a defect with somebody who is not interested in self-development, I may start listening to all sorts of unnecessary comments, or this person may start to connect from my words and tell me all of his life in 5 hours without any need. Or there are several things which may happen which do not help me. So this is the condition where we spend most of our day. Something happens, I react. I have a thought about that. That thought calls a feeling into action on the stage. And that goes on for a while. The thought thinks itself in my head. The feeling feels itself in my head. I'm not there. I'm not feeling that. Then one thought connects to another in a chain of association. So the former thought goes away from the stage the next one comes on stage and performs its usual script, we will see that there is a lot of repetition in our mind. It's like we have a not very big set of records, and they come onto the stage if they are elicited by some association. Then they do the little show, and then they kind of degrade and something else comes, normally by means of an association. An association may be, for example, I see a van on the street, and for a moment I look at that, and that reminds me of something I saw 2 years ago. Then I actually talked with the pilot 2 years ago, and he was quite a nice guy. But you know what? I didn't really like him because this and that. And then now that I think about it, that year I was actually very sad. You know, associations come like this. They are like a train where each car draws the following and is drawn by the preceding one. And that can go on for a long time. We may spend hours in this activity of self-destruction, basically. But on a shorter term, we are just wasting our energy. So we are throwing away, through thoughts, unwanted thoughts and unwanted feelings and unwanted movements of our body, like playing with my hair, or my foot is vibrating like that, or I do strange movements with my face. All of that energy goes wasted into the fulfillment and the nourishing of these egos. Once they have their belly full, they leave the stage and something else comes on stage to feed itself of our energy. So that is exactly the type of energy that we need to build something else, the noble part of us, the subtle bodies, as they call them sometimes. But if we waste that into this unwanted sequence of feelings and thoughts, then we have nothing left. One way of these egos to express themselves, if they are very heavy and they are like a cluster working together, may be called depression. So it's easy to be overwhelmed by this if the circumstances in life have been organized in a certain way, and by whom or by what is not now something of our concern, but it's an interesting topic by itself. But let's say that if I have been somehow pushed into a corner and I'm constantly besieged by very strong egos, it's almost impossible for me to come out. So this is one of the ways that a personality of this type may ruin our life. There is a border somewhere where the unease of an ordinary life goes into a pathological condition, at least if we want to use labels. The fact that our thoughts are crazy and they appear without control is considered perfectly normal by official psychology. But when they make us unable to function in society, then we are considered pathological. The fact is, I would certainly say that it's pathological to not be in control of our minds. But this is so widespread and at the same time so difficult to notice that for a strange situation, psychology has largely ignored this for centuries. And it's considered absolutely normal that our thoughts are out of control. Anyway, let me close this parenthesis to say that things are often very different from the official version that we are given, but it takes a bit of effort to question our reality. Am I seeing somebody raising their hands who wants to say something at this point? No. Okay. Okay. Sorry. It's my impression. Anyway, if you have questions and you think they are very relevant for the point, you may ask me. But otherwise, at the end, we will have a question and answer session. Okay. Oh yeah, I see now a hand up. So it's Andrea. Please go ahead.
Yes. Before you mentioned that when someone knows perfectly something about our behavior, that is a part of our ego. But this point is always true, or in that concept can be applied in specific situation of our daily life.
So thank you, Andrea. It is a safe assumption to say that when we have just started our journey in self-knowledge, basically all of that appears in our mind is somehow the product, a byproduct of some ego. So very often that particular idea that is coming doesn't have a particular usefulness for our life. If we make a list of the things that have come to the fore in our head and we underline those which have really helped us during the day, you will see that there's very few of them. Normally, they are more the result of associations. So I'd say the more you look inwards, the more you realize this. As of now, it's just a statement by Alberto, but you can make this yours if you start an activity of self-observation that we will amply mention later, starting from next week. There are practices that we can do in order to exercising our very weak muscles of some of the senses that we never use. They are beyond the 5 senses, and these senses are meant to look inwards. So we are not used to doing that. We can learn that. That's within our possibilities. And I say it's like our birthright as humans to be able to look inside. We're just not taught to do that. And there may be some intention behind that. But let's not be conspiranoics. Let's say that it's good to learn that. And when I say looking inside, I don't mean just at our thoughts. I mean our feelings and also observing our body as a whole, from your breathing to the posture, to the tensions that you may have. So this may feel a bit overwhelming. Do not think you have to learn to do all of this at once, but this is to give you the scope. So that is quite a broad scope that we're talking about. And little by little, you can start having a conversation with your liver or looking at your breathing. Don't be surprised. The scope of what you can do is pretty wide. I have placed an example in the syllabus that describes a chain of associations. So you may have probably read that. That's the description of the first 10 minutes in my office in the morning. That's a way to show how associations work. So I'm entering my office and a compliment from a colleague puts me in a good mood for a moment. But then I approach my desk and I see that there's a big form waiting for me, and that really bothers me. And a phrase forms in my head. Oh, they have nothing else to do but bother me, those morons from the department upstairs. One more form. Then I sit down on the chair. The chair creaks, makes a little noise. Oh, and that reminds me the way my grandmother used to laugh when I was a child. And for a moment, I am in bliss. Yeah, I feel like the spoiled child that I was when I was a little child. Yeah. Then I see again the form, and I feel a knot in my stomach. I have to feel it. And I start to write. And I make a mistake and I curse. I have to do that again. And so on and so forth. So all of this spans maybe just 3 minutes of my life, doesn't have any influence of consciousness whatsoever. Everything happens inside my head, in my feelings, just because of associations. So you can easily see that this is a pattern that may feel a whole day. And in fact, it does feel most of people's lives if they don't make an effort to be otherwise. Now, the problem is, how do you start becoming aware of this? Because if somebody enters my office and tells me, hey, Alberto, you know, you've been pretty mechanical this morning, then pride and vanity step forward and talk very, very loudly, and they speak up, and there's an earthquake here, and they speak up and they say, how dare you talk like that? You know, I'm concentrating and I'm fully conscious. Now, when somebody says I'm fully conscious with a bad face, you can really tell that it's maybe not true. But the really important thing is to realize when we are conscious or not. So how do we start seeing ourselves in the face of this situation? We may be making a promise now, and when it comes to having to fulfill the promise, I have forgotten, and then some other part of me that says, no, I can't remember promising that. There is an interesting metaphor about this, which is that each of us is like a house when there is an owner, a master, which lives in the cellar, is like locked in the cellar, and 100 servants which go around the house mind their own business. And each time the phone rings, one of them at random, whoever was closer to the phone, picks up the phone and speaks as the owner of the house, the master, takes control, makes commitments, expresses things, and that puts out the phone. And then if 5 minutes later the phone rings again, guess what? Another one takes the phone. And he may have totally forgotten what the other said. And it's very rare and very difficult for the real owner to step up from the cellar, which is, let's say, the waking sleep, into a state of presence and pick up the phone and have a continuity in his purpose, in his goal for his life. So when we are controlled by our egos, we undergo a fragmentation of our life, in that each ego has its own agenda, its own purposes, which are normally petty and very insignificant from a higher point of view. But when that ego is in charge, that's all there is. So it will do everything it can to be fed and to get some energy. That's why we may become pretty narrow-minded when we are identified in something. When I say identified, I mean we are lost into something that we are thinking or feeling, so lost that we don't feel our presence. So time starts fading and we disappear into nothingness, while our body does things, our mouth says things, and then after 5 minutes we kind of may have a moment of back to a higher state of presence. And we wonder, oh, how could I say that? Which is a very fair question. So the moment we realize we've been doing something, the simple fact that we are reflecting onto what we are feeling and doing is a sign that our little light inside has lit. That little light is a metaphor for our consciousness, but possibly is a very literal metaphor. But let's say that it means that our divine spark or our essence for a moment is shining. And when it shines, there is a lot less space for the ego to thrive in. the ugly and sometimes horrible parts, which we consider parts of ourselves, but which really aren't, they can only express themselves in an environment which is in darkness. The moment you are present to yourself, you are casting your inner light into this darkness. And all of those big or little monsters go away, and they retreat into wherever they go when they do not exist. Have you ever seen a horror movie? I hope not, but if you have, try to remember, where do monsters come from? Do they come from a grass under the sunlight? That's impossible. No monster could live there. They always come from a dark place, don't they? Mm-hmm. It wouldn't really be even believable that the monster comes in full sunlight. It would just be laughable. Now, that is a very close parallel to our psychology. Monsters come out of inner darkness, that is the sleep of consciousness. The more we bathe our interior landscape in the light which comes from our essence, and the less there is food and opportunity for our egos to enter the stage and hijack our energy. I'd like to remark and underline something, that is, we all have at least a glimpse or a small understanding that there are parts of us that we do not like, and we tend to maybe feel ashamed of them. They are the things you wouldn't confess even to your favorite priest if you are in some religion, because you think, no, I can't say that. Now, the good news is that is not yourself. And this may be a liberating concept. This is part of what has attached itself to us in our, let's say, early years, or if you believe in reincarnation in past lives. So it's something that blocks our light from shining and has been clinging to us for so long that we consider it part of ourselves. Well, I'm here to tell you that one of your rights as human beings is to disavow, to distantiate yourself from these things and say to yourself, this is not me. I may have mistaken it for part of myself. I may have been confused and misled into thinking that this is me, but this is not. And with proper introspection and training and shining my light onto the darkness inside, little by little, this will become weaker and eventually fall off. And I will feel a sense of freedom, liberation. This is one of the rights that is not stated in the Constitution, but I'd like you to keep it in mind and consider that you may always disavow your thoughts and feelings. All it takes is a moment of presence. Your real nature is shiny and wonderful. Yet it takes an effort to realize that fully. You may feel that in rare moments when you are inspired, when you see something beautiful, when you read a book where there's a hero that does certain things, and you feel like, oh, I am like that as well. Then you close the book, the movie ends, and you fall back into your horrible normality. Well, the good news is you can live the same story as your hero. But remember, heroes do a lot of effort to defeat their enemies or dragons. They suffer a lot. And that doesn't mean you have to get a sword and go chopping heads. that's a metaphor. If you have to chop some heads, that's the head of the ego. And basically, it is a matter of stop feeding it instead of losing ourselves into it. So what are the consequences of this sleep on a wider scale? At personal level, we have seen that they basically ruin our life, plain and simple. They make us do and feel things that we don't like. They make us go into choices and directions in life that we later regret. Although sometimes we can make good use of some of the problems that they create. But let's say that they don't do it because they love us. They do it because they want to live and survive at our expense. They're like parasites. Now, at a social level, I think now you can guess that the sleep of consciousness is the main problem of society at large, because people who are asleep, like citizens who are asleep, are easier to control. It's easier to push them into a certain direction. You just inject some fear and they are easy to maneuver. No reference to the current situation, just a coincidence, okay? Or it's easy to funnel people's energy into a particular direction and get a group of people to, for example, create hate thoughts about other groups. You may know that during the Second World War, children in schools in Germany were taught that the British normally eat children and do other horrible things. And children in England were taught that the Germans do that. How does that work? Well, it works pretty well, because then on the front lines, you have millions of people who accept to go and kill and be killed in the name of your country. Have you ever met somebody who really sincerely felt that war is a good solution for some problem? I never have. And yet, on the battlefields, there are millions, well, hundreds of thousands, okay, of people ready to kill and be killed. Now, that is because we are pretty easy to maneuver when we are in our sleep. We are not ready to question. And since our childhood, we are taught that there are some authorities who are in charge, and they are there for our good. So the politicians, they want our happiness. The advertising on the street is to help you being happier. And so on and so forth. Now, if we believe all of this, the day we are told, go and fight because the bad Norwegian is coming, or that people is really mean for us, then you're ready to do that because you don't question what you're told, the official narrative. And we can also deceive ourselves. So we may also fall for our own traps. That's the ego trying to funnel our energy in a certain direction. So at a social level, this is definitely the worst illness of our society. Now, can it be cured for the masses? I don't know of a way. In fact, it might even be, say, out of the possibilities because of certain reasons that we may touch upon later. But in small groups, it is possible. A small group of people who are committed to escaping from this prison, that means taking down the walls inside their minds, they can do that. There's nothing guaranteed. There's not anything that I could sign to say you will be free in so many weeks, but it's a definite possibility. And if you feel a strong drive towards that, that's a good sign. If you take this conversation as just information, and that's a different thing. You may easily forget about this in a couple of weeks. Otherwise, you may feel that, I want to pursue this. How come I didn't know about this earlier? Or things like that. And that's a good sign. So at a social level, it's normally necessary for the authorities or the social, let's say, people in charge to create some barriers to contain our lower impulses. So there are laws, there are punishments for those who break the laws, etc., etc., because it is assumed, quite rightfully, that people cannot control themselves. And you can see that easily when there is all of a sudden a lack of control. Say that there is a blackout in a city, or the police are on strike, or something like that. So there is a certain of guaranteed impunity. Then people flock to the streets. They do horrible things. If you keep the police in place, if the lights are still on, then people's lower instincts are more contained. They may do the same things inside their house. But are they guilty? Now, in sleep, you do the only thing that is possible for you. It's like you have a script and you can only do that. So this raises a very important moral question. How responsible are we of our actions? And briefly, I'd say it's difficult to say because that depends on your state of consciousness. So if you are aware of yourself and you still do something very bad, then I'd say you are a lot more responsible than if you do the same thing while identified and under the belief that this person is really mean, or what I see here doesn't belong to anyone, so why don't I take it? So if you are hypnotized or sleeping, you have a certain degree of responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have to create a law or a punishment, because otherwise the chaos would break loose. But what we're talking about is what happened inside when that action took place. So now you have a sort of frame of reference to understand that responsibility depends on the state of consciousness. And this is not written in any law. But knowing that can give you a much deeper perspective. So I have now gone a bit longer than I thought I would, but if you're happy to stay a little longer together, we could now do a bit of a practice to savor our presence and to relax and try and see if we can become masters of our mind for a minute. Sounds easy. Is it? So what we could do, like last week, is you're welcome to close your eyes if you feel more at ease. Normally this makes things easier. Start by try and feel your body. You can push your awareness to the furthest reaches of your body and go and say hi to your foot, for example, or to an ear. You can explore your body in different ways, in different areas, which are normally too far away from the center. Another interesting thing, look at your breathing. If it's very slow, you will normally feel more relaxed. You may notice also your heartbeat. First, in your heart, where it's easier to feel. But if you pay attention, you may discover your heartbeat in other parts of your body. It's easier on the right-hand side because that's where the wave from your heart goes first. And then you can explore your shoulders, see if there's any tension there. And what about your eyes? Are they tense? What about your jaws and your neck? Feels like the body is quiet. We can have a look at our mind, maybe. Also, we might have a look at the center of our chest, our solar plexus, where our feelings tend to express themselves. Can you feel the pressure of the chair under you? Can you feel your feet on the floor? Or your clothes on your skin? There is a little light inside of us. It comes from the center of our brain, where the pineal gland is. When it's shining, our body and our subtle parts are bathed in light. You may feel that every molecule and every cell is suddenly happy when the light shines. It's a subtle feeling. Don't worry if it's not too clear. You may try to express your love to your body in your words, silently. See how it responds. It's wonderful to feel loved, and our body is no exception. Now go back to your breathing and start slowly moving again your body. Land in your virtual reality again. When you feel ready, open your eyes. I'm sorry we had to return here. I know it felt better the way we were a minute ago. But bringing that state of bliss in everyday reality, and I don't want to say routine, I say reality, is one of the targets here. Gradually, we can bring some of that bliss in the moment, in the here and now. It's like establishing a connection, a short circuit in a good sense, between your inner real being and the virtual reality in which we normally walk and talk. Good. So I believe now we may have a few questions and hopefully good answers. If you would like to ask something, just raise your hand. Okay, I have Daniel here, so you can go first, Daniel. Go.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about essentially being able to perceive with different parts of the body. I've been kind of gleaning this from things that I've read and trying to understand it in my own practice, to essentially like use the entire body as like an organ for like sense perception. And so like when I saw the diagram that you had in the article leading up to this webinar with the like multi-directional arrow in the guy's head, kind of the spherical attention.
Yes.
Yeah, like when I first tried that, like it was really powerful to kind of do that, like at the back of my head and kind of see in this global fashion. But then I started finding, for me, it was really helpful to like, when I'm in the world and something is kind of triggering my automatic response to something, there's usually a tension associated with it. And so for a long time, I would try to almost observe that tension from my head. And it was like I was looking at it from here. But more recently, I've tried almost looking at the world from the center of that tension.
Oh, I see.
And it's like, yeah, and it for me, it's like dissolve the tension and then something else comes up and I travel over there. And it's like I keep seeing the world from different perspectives all over my body. And I was just curious what your perspective on that was, because I know you were saying kind of the pineal gland was the place where the light was originating, or if that's just like one part of the hologram. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. This is helpful to clarify what I was mentioning before. So personally, I find myself more comfortable looking at various parts of my being from the center of the brain, just because that's where I feel I am. So it's not really a choice I'm making. It's like the natural way for me to do it. An example of this could be, I don't know if you've ever had an out-of-the-body experience, but sometimes it may happen that you get out of the body and you see your physical body on the bed, but you're not there. You are by the side and you're watching that. Now, how come it's not the other way around? How come you're not watching your subtle body from the physical one? Now, my natural explanation would be, because my subtle body is closer to what I really am. So that's my point of view. So it's not something I choose, it's rather the consequence of my subtle esoteric anatomy. So some say that there is a series of bodies, each one more subtle than the other, starting from the physical then there's an etheric body, and then there's an astral body, and then a mental body, and then the causal body, etc., etc. And each of them is closer to our source, our divine spark or reality. So whenever some of these bodies separates from the others, your feeling of I am here resides in the higher one. Because of the rest is like clothes you've been wearing on top of one another. So when you take off your clothes, you see yourself from the point of view of your head, not of your trousers, so to speak. Now, if you want to experiment with other ways, I say, welcome be it. Of course, it's good to try and experiment. What I'm reporting is just my personal observation. I hope that helps you somehow. Okay, any other hands? Some of you, please keep in mind, Alan, Ray, Anne, Stuart, I cannot see you. So even if you raise your hand, I don't have superpowers. There's a question coming. You will have to speak up or write a chat. Yes, I see. Don? Yes?
Yeah.
Rock.
Yeah. So I understand that awareness helps not fuel like mechanical behavior, whether that mechanical behavior is a thought form or an emotion or even a bodily response. Something that I have an issue with is oftentimes I need to focus very heavily to accomplish some task, whether it's a task at my work or, trying to be physically fit. And the problem is my focus will have to be given to all that. And I will notice my mechanical functions will start to act up. So my body will start to tense in a way that it'll actually, sometimes to such a degree that it'll injure me for a long period of time. Or I'll have a mechanical thought just start looping around in the background. And yeah, after I'm done focusing on whatever that mental or physically difficult task is, I can then worry about it. But a lot of times it gets like very powerful, and then it's like a bigger issue than I wanted to deal with before. So how do I dissolve these issues completely so I don't have them, because I can, when my awareness is there, it's not an issue, but when I have to focus on something else, they come up. So how do I deal with that?
I'd say that the easiest way to go about it is to be a spectator of that particular thought, for example, intensely stare at that inside, of course, while maintaining that feeling that you are the one who's doing the staring, okay? So if you are there on the solid foundation of your feeling of presence, looking with all of your light at whatever this thought form is trying to do and act up, you will see that very soon it will lose its flair and ability to hijack you and will retreat into darkness. Now, of course, this is easier if you are sitting relaxed and not having to lift a weight, for example. So, of course, this is not the type of exercise you do in competition with some heavily demanding task, because if you don't master this, and at the beginning, who does, then you may put yourself in danger. But if that particular thought is as strong as you say, you may just attract it into your place instead of going to his place. What I mean is, you sit down, you relax, and you exactly know what triggers it. And call it. You ever seen Bruce Lee going like this? What I mean is, normally they come uninvited, but now we are exercising our right not only to disassociate from them, but also to call them when we want, for the purpose of dissolving them. So now they are no longer the masters, we are. And staring intensely while being present will melt that like snow, little by little. The more you can put your presence into that, and the faster this will be.
Thank you. Just to be more specific, it is, I view it as a thought form, but it's like my body will get tense in places and it'll cause me physical pain to make me not focus on stuff. So like while paying attention to this lecture, there's a tenseness that forms in my body and it's like a resistance to this, but it's still applicable to everything you just said. So thank you very much.
You're right. Your attention can go to your body just as it goes to your thought. There is a nice little blue hand here. So Eduardo, who is like a pro with Zoom, has found a way to show a little hand there. I know Johan also has, but Eduardo's hand was here before. So Eduardo, you're up.
Thank you. Do you think thought forms or servitors are sometimes helpful, Alberto?
Mm-hmm. I would not give them the honor to call them helpful. I would rather say we can make good use of them.
Okay.
And let me thank you for this, because in fact, those particular thoughts and feelings that seem to haunt us the most are normally pointers in a precise direction. That is, where we are more lacking in our development, psychologically speaking and esoterically speaking. So there are some problems that for some reason we never experience in life, and others which seem to be very, very attracted to us. Why is that? Well, the easiest explanation that I have for that is they are the ones you need the most. From a higher perspective, okay? So you may complain that you don't like them and you don't want them. But if you really enter a state of presence, you will see that you don't feel like complaining anymore. And you have a slight sense of being grateful. You don't need to spend words to say, thank you, ego, I love you so much. No, that's not what I mean. We are rather considering that the real warrior can make good use of the most difficult circumstances. That's a sort of call to the mission for us.
Good. Good. Thank you.
Johan, please.
Yes, it was something I was thinking about when Sean was talking, when he talked about having a physical pain, keeping his attention away from, let's say, like following a seminar or whatever. I was just thinking that, like they say, you cannot solve a problem from the same level that it exists. So if you have a physical problem, I would say you can solve it from the higher level, which would be feelings. When you have an emotional problem, you can solve it from the level of thoughts. When you have a problem with a thought, you can solve it from intuition. So you always go a step higher. And if you try to do it from the same level, it normally won't work. So it sort of fits in with what you've said before. Why can't you see, why is it your body, when you have an out-of-body experience, why is it the body that's outside that sees the body laying in the bed and not the other way around? Same thing. So that's sort of reply to what Sean came up with.
I see. Thank you for your remark. Well, ultimately, everything comes from the highest point. It's just that the connection may not be so clear from our point of view. Of course, if we consider that we all come from the source or or we all come from a Big Bang. All of this is like considering that our body comes from a single cell. So do not be surprised if the root of your physical problem is in an emotion, and the emotion is normally called into action by a thought, and the thought comes from some seeds which are higher up in our astral body, or higher up still. But to express ourselves in a way that is more understandable, we talk at different levels, using whichever one is more appropriate for the particular task at hand. Talking about hands, anybody? Yes, Carl, please unmute yourself and.
Okay, could it be that the problem that John talked about, that there are thought forms that work against us, you know, that cause, he wants to listen to your, what you have to say, and there is a thought form inside him that doesn't want him to understand how things work. So it causes pain, and that causes destruction.
Yes, this is pretty right. I fully agree, because the ego knows that what you're hearing today is a sort of recipe to take it down. So they will try to distract, they will try to make you think that I'm saying stupid things, or they will make you think of what you have to do tomorrow, or they will remind you that I look like that friend of yours that was so stupid, things like that. Don't fall for this, it's a trick. And that is a sign of desperation, because the ego knows it's risking its life. It's more than a risk, it's a certainty. You will take it down if you want.
Thank you all for that input, and I will definitely look at this issue the way that you guys are telling me to. I know simple thought forms don't work because I've started to understand those mechanics better, so they just don't work. I just know they're excuses, and I've just noticed my ego actually physically attacking me in order to break my concentration, because the excuses just don't work. So thank you, I appreciate it. I'll work on that.
Great, Sean. And actually, this is a great example we're getting. We are not here just for the theory. We are here to put this into practice. And the more we go on, and the more you will have tools to do good things for yourselves. So this is the first example. Thank you very much, Sean. You are giving yourself love and a big help here, and all of us. Mm-hmm. I see one more little hand here. Eduardo, is it still there from before, or it's a different question?
No. It's not. Ninguna de las dos.
Okay. We have learned how to put the hand up. We still have to learn how to take it down. Okay. I think, oh yeah, I see one more hand here. So Johan or maybe Martin.
It's Martin, yes.
Yes.
You were talking about the body, the mind, and the feelings, and I read in a book, and the person told that the mind was something exactly functioning like the digestive system, something that works on his own. So I would like to know, what is your point of view on that? Or can you explain?
Thank you. So this is a great topic that is has been brought to the West by that same person and investigator, Mr. Gurdjieff from the Middle East, that we have three types of food, which are the basic food that everybody knows. Then we have air, and then we have impressions. And each of these, when it enters our bodies, may or may not be digested, depending on what it finds inside. And the result of this digestion of each of these food, which are on a tiered level, if good food is digested correctly, then it creates a substance that helps us to digest air. And if air is digested correctly, it helps us create a finer substance that helps us to digest ideas. And if our ideas enter our consciousness when we are present, we can, guess what, digest them and turn them into an even higher and more refined substance, which can build our subtle bodies. So all of these are called hydrogens in the terminology of the fourth way teaching. And there are very interesting and complex schemes and explanations about the various hydrogens and how they interact with one another. It's something you can easily find online, or if you want, I can suggest a book or two about this. Let's say that the very important concept you get out of that in the end is what we have on lesson 3. So if you want a shortcut, at the end of that, you learn that you have to remember yourself, because that's how you digest impressions. I'm not saying that it's not a great read anyway. Okay, haven't heard, but looked like, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And also for the invitation to feel our presence. It feels like it's really an invitation that comes from you or from a bigger part of, I don't know how to explain.
Well, let's say that when we meet somebody, we are somehow asking the cosmos, more or less consciously, to put us in contact with maybe a new idea, a new concept. So the fact that I am now a vehicle for you to come in contact with these things is something that probably your inner part was looking for. So I'm happy to be the conduit for this to come through.
Wow.
Are we out of hands? Great. Daniela, vuoi fare un salutino, dire qualcosa? Okay. Oh, yes.
Mary.
Please go ahead, Mary.
I just wanted to know, is that really an earthquake you're experiencing, or is that I'm teasing, and I'm so gullible sometimes, but
Oh, no, sorry. It's just a joke.
okay. I'm relieved.
The fact is, there is a difficulty in video conferencing about where your stare goes.
Okay.
So I've mounted my camera in a position that should somehow make it look like we have eye contact. But to do that, I've built something pretty interesting that is working, but is not too rigid. So sometimes if I hit the table, we will have a bit of an earthquake. So don't worry. By the way, we are in a country where there's, I think, never been an earthquake.
Wow.
We are in England, so it's not our, let's say, own country. We are from Italy, but for some reason here they've never had one. So don't worry. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being together with us here. This is something I'm enjoying as much as you, I believe. So if everything goes as we would like, I guess we will be in touch, and we will meet again next Saturday. In the meantime, I will send you a reminder halfway through the week. And Daniela is reminding me the important thing, that is, let's not forget to put what we learn into practice. Maybe setting aside a bit of time in the morning and in the evening, or however you feel more comfortable with. Try to exercise your presence, try to feel yourself. That will prepare you very well for our third lesson. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves. Be present as much as you can.
Bye.
And goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.
See you.
Thank you. See you next time.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. It's been very helpful.
And thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.